Welcome back to Inside Politics. Today our guest is Vanderbilt University professor Dr. Thomas Schwartz, who's an expert in both North Korea and also in American presidential politics. Dr. Schwartz, there was a lot of concern that in the 4-hour meeting that President Trump had with the North Korean president, human rights was not brought up much at all. The president was sort of ambiguous about whether he brought it up. First he thought he did, then he wasn't sure whether he did. He has said since then that he loves his people in North Korea and his people love him. That's not the reputation that Kim Jong-un has across the world. So is the United States moving back from a position of leadership on human rights because they won't bring it up with dictators like Kim Jong-un?
Well, I think a lot of the president's comments again are so over the top that it's hard to take them terribly seriously. I will give, and as a historian, I have to give some perspective on this. When Nixon went to China, he didn't bring up human rights either. And human rights conditions in China in 1972 were pretty awful. Situation, the Cultural Revolution was ongoing. Many people were under persecution. So this idea that an American president can meet with a sort of an offensive dictator is not totally new to Trump. Trump, I think, goes over the top with Kim, and certainly the loving his people and all of this sort of stuff is a bit much. But it is certainly not the case that American leaders have always brought up human rights. That is, in some ways, it is much more of a thing that Congress and the American people sort of press, and that can be in the background of a president's negotiations, but is oftentimes avoided.
You know, a lot of people feel like that the president has said that he's gone further in this particular situation with dealing with North Korea than any other president. And on his side, he can say, well, they're no longer testing missiles, they're no longer doing nuclear testing, they've taken out their own reactor. So he should get some credit for that. But on the other hand, we've had some more definitive agreements with North Korea that they just didn't follow. So are they more likely to follow a much more less definitive agreement, shall we say?
Well, this is the challenge, because in a way, when North Korea violated previous agreements, they had not been made directly by the President of the United States. If they violate this one, there's really no resolution. I mean, this would really be a situation in which you could see conflict.
But there's no timetable. There's no the words irreversible, the words verifiable don't appear in this.
Right.
So how would they know if anybody is violating it or following it?
Well, unless the Secretary of State sets up some sort of mechanism for testing. Now, of course, obviously they could do this in a very dramatic way if they were to test a missile or test a nuclear device. But on the sort of fringes, on the types of cheating that could take place, obviously they could get away with a great deal of that if they wanted to.
The president has probably been as nice as he possibly could be about this, but he has a history sometime of taking those people who have been very close to or been lavishing praise on, and suddenly one day there's a tweet spurt that goes exactly the opposite direction. Right. Would you be surprised to turn on the news one day and find out that's happened in this particular situation? And if it does, we then go to the doomsday clock a lot further, move closer to
that would be the problem. That would be the problem, because unlike Comey or unlike some of his domestic opponents, this would be a very serious thing for him to turn on, because there's nothing. What would happen? I mean, he did cancel, as we recall, he canceled the summit 2 weeks beforehand. It didn't look like things were going to go back, and then it got rescheduled. So he does. This would be a challenging situation if the North Koreans were in some way to really quite directly violate their understanding and irritate the president in a way, then it would certainly ratchet up the tension.
Now, Secretary of State Pompeo is probably going to be one of the people that will continue to talk about this. He's already been to see the Chinese. I believe he's been to see the Japanese as well. What's he going to say? Because when he was asked about it by the media, he sort of took umbrage at the fact that he was even asked questions about, how can it be verified? How can it be considered irreversible? He said those things are assumed within the statement, but how do you assume things that those words are not even used in the statement?
Well, no, he's in a tricky position, because this is actually it does remind me historically of something that Secretary of State Dean Acheson, who's one of our greatest secretaries of state, said, who really disliked the idea of presidential summits, because, as he said, if the president fumbles, the goal line's clear behind him, and if the president, in this case, the Secretary of State has to try and capture or make up for a situation in which the president has signed a very vague agreement, and he has to try and do it in ways that will achieve the objectives that he's going to be trying to do.
How much do you feel that the vagueness of the agreement that was signed is because that's a new diplomacy effort, and how much of it is that the Trump administration and Trump himself is not known for a lot of preparation and deep thought and study and reading behind doing these things and putting together what normally would happen in terms of staff work before you have a summit?
Well, they're smart. There are some smart people around there that could have gotten in more of this detail. It may be Trump so very much wanted to be able to sign something with the North Koreans, and the time was so limited that he was willing to take much broader and vaguer wording and hope that it could be worked out on the other side, or had assurances secretly or privately from either the Chinese or others that they would help. So he may have been benefiting from that, but you're right that it could also be sloppy staff work.
In terms of domestic politics, what happened in North Korea is probably going to help the president's numbers, and his numbers are going up. Why?
Well, I think the key reason, of course, they're going up is the economy. There may be, in fact, we may have broken past what was thought to be the 2% growth limits that many had thought we were stuck in for now because of technology and productivity. That is an important indicator for many Americans, the fact that you can get a job, that your wages are going up. And the other thing is that the other key often in political concerns, and this is back in 1972 when Nixon went to China, people called it Nixon's primary. He went during the election season. Timed it better maybe, but Trump may be timing it toward the midterms with the idea that I'm bringing peace and prosperity being central to any campaign slogan.
Dr. Thomas Schwartz from Vanderbilt University is our guest. He's an expert on presidential politics. He's an expert on North Korea. We're going to talk a little bit more about the trade situation as well and the trade wars after you see this break.